Hong Kong's unrest rages on even after the SAR government withdrew the controversial fugitive bill, with radical protesters calling on the U.S. to intervene. What can we expect next? And the White House announced U.S. Vice President Mike Pence will deliver his major China speech later this year. Will his words stoke or extinguish tensions between China and the U.S., especially as fresh trade talks hang in the balance? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. The 3 months of turbulence in Hong Kong shows no signs of ending, even after Chief Executive Carrie Lam announced last Wednesday the withdrawal of the fugitive bill that sparked the unrest. Radical protesters set up barricades, lit street fires and vandalized public facilities on Sunday. Thousands of protesters also marched outside the U.S. consulate, waving American flags and urging the U.S. Congress to pass a new bill to interfere in Hong Kong. Where are things going? What impact will the bill have if passed? Joining me for the discussion from Hong Kong is Henry Ho, founder and chairman of the One Country, Two Systems Youth Forum, a think tank, and here in our Beijing studio, Professor Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. As I said, thousands of Hong Kong people marched outside the U.S. consulate in Hong Kong, some waving U.S. flags and shouting slogans in English such as "Fight for freedom," "Stand with Hong Kong," and some of them even shouted, "President Trump, liberate us." So Henry, going to you first, what are your comments on such behavior and such words? How much support do they enjoy among the general public in Hong Kong?
Well, obviously, these kind of slogans and requests are absurd. We all know that American and as well as other countries, they will only stand for their own interests. And we have seen a fierce trade war between China and the U.S. And at this particular moment in time, the protesters waving U.S. flags and shouting these slogans would do more harm than good, for sure. That also testifies the fact that the Western countries, in particular U.S., are really supporting these riots, and they are not, helping Hong Kong people in any way at all. According to your understanding, your observation, how is the situation at this moment? I mean, the SAR government has officially withdrawn the so-called extradition bill. So has the protest or the riot changed in any way since then? Well, I think most of us has saw the headline being the flames outside the underground central station. In my opinion, this is really kind of a show, or just to highlight media attention, because the movement is now losing public support rapidly, and overall, as I observed yesterday, the number of militant and violent protesters have decreased significantly. In the evening, we saw maybe, I guess, just 100 or 200 protesters. So they're blocking several streets at a time, and in some cases, even the police officers outnumber them. So now we are seeing that the decreasing level of support among the public as the vandalism and the destruction and the violence escalate. Again, situation shrinking in scale, but do you foresee calm returning to the streets of Hong Kong anytime soon, especially now the U.S. Congress has reintroduced this bill calling, for more U.S. interference in Hong Kong's affairs? Well, I think it's difficult to answer this question, but I'm sad to see that because the movement is losing public support, I think the rioters, they are using 3 tactics to sustain it. The violence, hatred, and lies. We have seen escalating violence, including vandalizing of public properties like mass transit railway, blocking of airports. We have seen the spread of hatred towards public police officers and also their family members. And we also see they are telling lies. For example, saying 3 people were killed at an underground station, which definitely is not true. So on one hand, they're losing public support, but on the other hand, some of them, are not they want to sustain this so-called revolution for a longer time, and these kind of dirty tricks or tactics are being used. So I think it's difficult to foresee when will these riots when will the peaceful situation will return back to Hong Kong.
I understand. Okay, let's turn to the so-called Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act that has been reintroduced by the U.S. Congress. Now, the Hong Kong government has expressed its opposition, as well as China. Actually, China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs urged last Friday that certain U.S. politicians to immediately stop pushing Hong Kong-related legislation, cease interfering in Hong Kong affairs at once, and make efforts to enhance mutual trust and cooperation between China and the United States. I understand this act would, for instance, require, if passed, would require the U.S. Secretary of State to issue an annual certification of Hong Kong's autonomy to justify special treatment afforded to Hong Kong, would require the President to identify persons responsible for, quote, suppressing basic rights and freedom in Hong Kong and put them under sanction. It would also require the Secretary of Commerce to issue an annual report assessing Hong Kong's enforcement of U.S. trade regulations, such as trade sanctions. So there are other things that the Act would require if it is passed. So, Professor Gong, what kind of leverage do you think the U.S. would have by if this bill is passed, and what is the intention of introducing such a law by some congressmen?
Well, first of all, the intention of doing this is to open another ground of skirmish in a broader theater of sort of a more of a confrontational approach with China, and I see a quite high likelihood of this bill being passed in Congress, because to both else in the Congress, it imposes no cost at all, and they feel this is a free pass that they can do something to show that they're being tough on China. And given the political climate right now in Washington, D.C., I think a lot of senators will vote for this bill. But in terms of a real impact on China and on Hong Kong, I don't think so. I don't think that it's going to have any significant consequence. Hong Kong belongs to China, and we have SAR government. I think eventually things will come back to normal, and we'll go on with our own business here in Hong Kong and in China. Now, in terms of how long it's going to take before things are going to quiet down, now we have to keep in mind that there's a date which is China's national holiday coming on October 1st. So I think these people organizing these things on the streets in Hong Kong are going to keep doing these things, even though their movement is losing steam, as Harry has mentioned. But they're going to keep going back to the streets, and I'm pretty sure they will also come out on the streets on October 1st, do their own things. But I think the right attitude towards these people is just contain their actions, minimize their impact, and overall ignore them. They are very marginal elements in society. They are not going to have a major impact on people's life anymore. So I think
on the other hand, such as legislation from the side of the United States is nothing new. Okay, we've seen this kind of legislation in the past, and yet we continue to see this kind of legislation. What does it constitute to? I mean, John, basically, imagine if China would pass, or the Chinese legislative body would pass such a bill about what happens, let's say, in New York City during the Occupy Wall Street movement, and calling on the United States government to treat these people in a certain way and not in any other way. Well, what's wrong does China see in this kind of bills, and is it legitimate?
Well, in a way, it's clearly, in my view, it's clearly political interference in another sovereign country. But I guess the senators and congressmen in Washington don't view it that way. I mean, they hold sort of they think they hold the moral high ground and have entitled to express an opinion on these issues and take concrete actions. It's not the first time they do this. I think they have done this in the past with respect to other countries. They've passed bills with respect to Taiwan, for example. These are just cards the politicians in Washington, D.C. can play vis-a-vis China.
But it does have some kind of teeth. Let's say it would require the Secretary of State, for instance, to issue an annual certification of Hong Kong's economy, meaning if they do not see that Hong Kong is still the kind of free economy that it is today, then it has the power to stop giving Hong Kong a special treatment as a free port. Let me go to Henry. Henry, how do you see such a bill and its potential impact on the situation of Hong Kong? First of all, does the development of Hong Kong over the past 22 years under the one country, two system warrant any such concern about the high autonomy that Hong Kong enjoys?
Well, I think the human rights concern is really not justified. Now we are not having a problem of peaceful protest. Peaceful protests have been guaranteed in the past 22 years, much more than during the British colonial times. What the human rights issue we're having is that, you know, people in Hong Kong, they cannot have their normal way of life. They will risk blocking of roads or even airports, and they can't really meet their friends and relatives in the gatherings because the blockage of roads and the violence in MTR station will happen anytime. These are the real human rights issue. I think the police has been restrained, and only violent protests have been cracked down, and the peaceful protests, as we have seen even in the past 3 months, are being conducted very peacefully and in an orderly way.
I just want to add a note that in terms of police brutality, one of the 5 demands that address the police brutality, these are one of the 5 demands demonstrators asking of the SAR government. Now, if let's suppose this fire was set up yesterday in one of the subway stations in Hong Kong, if this happened in Washington, D.C., I mean, I don't know. I can imagine how the Washington, D.C. Police Department is going to respond to this. I would imagine there would be dead bodies on the ground, immediately when somebody set a fire on one of the stations in the Washington Metro. So,
it is the argument. I understand it is the argument of many people saying, because the United States police is acting a certain way, so what the police in Hong Kong is doing is definitely not so bad. But I don't think we should compare, who's worse. I think, the police have to do the right thing, and not that they can do this simply because police in other places are worse. I think the conduct of the police in Hong Kong has been up to par to the highest international standards.
The issue is that if Washington frames this as a human rights issue, I think it's a total mockery of the idea of democracy and human rights. So if you compare the situation in Washington, in the United States, and in Hong Kong, and you call the situation in Hong Kong as a violation of human rights, that just is absurd, I think.
Another thing is about this legislation on the transfer of fugitives, what everybody knows as the extradition bill. We know that the chief executive of Hong Kong has officially withdrawn this bill. So, Henry, now that the bill is gone, on what basis do you think the U.S. Congress still can go ahead and reintroduce this law, which was very much based on that controversial bill?
Well, the bill has been withdrawn, and regarding the 4 other demands, I think most of them are not really justified, including not to prosecute all the violent behavior, etc. And regarding the investigation of police behavior, actually, there's an independent police complaints council, and the government has just appointed overseas experts to handle this. So actually, the government has responded all the reasonable requests already, and I don't see any grounds for U.S. Congress to really interfere with this issue anymore.
Okay, we're going to leave it there, but we're going to continue to discuss this very important topic. Many thanks to Henry Ho from Hong Kong, founder and chairman of the One Country, Two Systems Youth Forum, and in the Beijing studio, Professor Gong from the University of International Business and Economics. You have been watching The Point. I'll take a quick break, but when we come back, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence will deliver a key speech on China later this year. What can we expect from the notorious China hawk this time? Stay with us.